backup. Backup initiated. Logging out all ports. Clear. And we are good to go.
Welcome to another episode of Brent's Exciting Movie Channel. Today we're going to be talking about rotary cutters. As you can see before me, they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Rotary cutters come in four sizes, typically speaking. You have an 18, these are the blades. So you have the 18 millimeter. I don't have a cutter here that's got an 18 on it. The 28 millimeter, which is this step up here. The 45 millimeter, which is going to be most of these here. And the 60 millimeter, which is going to be the biggest of the bunch. Now the question you may have is, why all the different sizes? The bigger the rotary cutter, the easier it's going to be to cut a straight line. And also, a bigger cutter will also allow you to cut through thicker materials. Scrapbookers and people that do a lot of fine stuff like applique and whatnot will sometimes use a 28 millimeter or even an 18 millimeter for small work, because an 18 or 28 millimeter can do curves very well. Because of the smaller blade, it's very nimble. You can trace around templates very nicely with it. The downside again to it is that you will not, it won't cut through thicker material. So you're going to get one thickness. Like I said, a lot of paper crafters will use it for cutting paper. But the smaller the blade, the nicer it's going to, the easier it's going to turn. The bigger the blade, so a 60 millimeter is the typical size of the large one. The 60 millimeter is going to cut nice and it's going to be easier to cut straight with it, and you'll be able to go through thicker materials. If you've been quilting for a while, or even if you haven't, you may have noticed that the standard blade side is the 45 millimeter. 45 millimeter is a nice compromise between the two. It's small enough that you can do some curves, but big enough that you can handle thicknesses of fabric, and it's going to cut fairly straight without a whole lot of trouble. The other advantage that a 45 millimeter has over 60 millimeter is cost of ownership. When you've got to change the blade on a 45 millimeter, you're talking, I can get these in bulk. They're about $4 a piece. I'm sure you can find them cheaper if you really want to, but I've tried with different quality. I find that the ones that we can get for $4 bulk are fairly nice. You're going to double the price for a 60 millimeter blade. So where 60 millimeter will cut straighter, is easier to cut straight and cuts very nicely, it's much more expensive to run because the blades are going to cost you more. The other problem that you're going to have with a 60 millimeter that you don't run into with a 45 millimeter is that 45 millimeter blades are pretty universal at this point. I can get an Alpha blade, I could get a Quilter Select blade, or I could even get a True Cut blade. That blade will fit in any 45 millimeter cutter. A 60 millimeter cutter, we happen to stock the True Cut blades because True Cut is what we stock for rotary cutters. But there's a compatibility issue between 60 millimeters. Some of them are cross-compatible and some are not. It has to do with the hole in the middle. Some are a little bit different. And I find with 60 millimeter blades that you don't see the compatibility that you get with 45s. So 45s are the size of choice. So if you're out, what do I buy for a rotary cutter? I don't know what I'm getting into. Buy yourself a 45 millimeter. That's what you're going to use the most of. It works really nice. Like I said, if you are into paper crafts and scrapbooking, you may have a 28 or an 18. I've never used one. But admittedly, I don't do a lot of template work and I don't do a lot of applique. But most everything I do is with a 45 millimeter. But at the end of the day, 45 is what you're going to want to go with. Next thing you want to look at is the shape of your cutter. We're now going to talk about the physics behind the cutting so that you understand how the grip and the handle affect the cutting and why. On your standard straight handle, which is this guy here, the first thing they're going to teach you is you have to be at a 45-degree angle when you cut. That's your blade lock. I'm going to leave the block on. 45-degree angle when you cut. Reason being, if you're too flat, you'll notice down here, if you're too flat, you don't have a lot of downward pressure. If you're too high, you can't move it forward very easily. So 45 degrees is that balance between enough downward pressure and being able to move your cutter forward. Now all straight-handled cutters are going to work fairly similar to this. This is the same concept, but what they've done is that little lever there it's actually spring-loaded guard, which is kind of a nice concept. I do like this cutter. And again, you want to be at a 45, but you'll notice they got a little bit of a curve to the handle, so it's easier to maintain that. So, again, you're at 45 so that you can push down and forward at the same time. But you're going to notice again, it's a regular grip, and I'm still going to have to maintain that 45 to get the proper downward and forward momentum. Where ergonomic cutters come in, but what you'll get here is good downward pressure because your hand is right on top of the blade, but because of the ergonomics of it, you can also push forward and pull back very easily, so you're not worried about getting that 45-degree angle. As you see here, you don't need to worry about that here. Most people, when they first use one of these, want to grip it back here. That is not correct. You want to be right up on top. Now, if you'll also look, my hand is straight forward. Now, if I look at this, you see how my hand is curved? So, if I've been cutting kits all day, the following day I have had where from my elbow to my wrist is killing me because of doing this all day, cutting kits. Whereas if I'm using my ergo cutter, my hand stays straight, so I'm not stressing my tendons and my muscles in my forearm, so the next day it's not going to kill me. If you're just cutting a few things here and there, you probably won't notice it, but I did notice this when I have done a lot of cutting. So when choosing a cutter, a lot of people do tend to stick to your standard straight-handled cutters because that's what they know and that's what they're comfortable with. Quick and easy to learn, 45 and go. But once you've gotten used to an ergonomic cutter, everybody I know that uses these on a regular basis will not go back to a straight cutter. Like I said, it's easier on the hands and it's much easier to cut. You can also cut sitting down because on a straight cutter, because you have to get this 45, if you're sitting at your sewing station, you got to get your elbow way up in the air so you can get the 45. Because you don't need that with this, you're just putting your hand on top and pushing forward, you can cut sitting down quite easily. The True Cut, which is a great cutter, we do have they're available in 3 sizes, in a 28, a 45, and a 60. They actually now come in a really pretty teal blue, but I kind of get attached to my cutters, and so I've been using this one for a while. He's my friend now, so I'm not going to trade him in for a blue one quite yet. If you're looking for a cutter, I would highly recommend a True Cut 45 millimeter. That's a good place to start. You'll use it. It's one of those tools that if you get into quilting, it'll last you forever. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you all enjoyed this episode of Brent's Exciting Video Channel.